Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. This is your host, Shayna, and this is my show, One Track Record. Thank you for joining. If you haven't already, please subscribe and hit all notifications. So, we are here with part two of our fairy tale origins, Snow White. And this is at the time of her meeting the dwarves and what we'll see shortly after and how this story plays out. Now, if you are listening to this for the very first time, you may want to stop in your tracks and go back to the original Snow White episode that came out last week, Sunday. Okay. Because if you don't, you will be lost. Okay? So before indulging in today's content or today's half of the story, trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. Okay? This episode is not intended for children. I repeat, today's episode is not intended for children. Okay? And it is not intended for children for the following reasons. This half of the episode alludes to the concept of necrophilia. Okay. It also deals with the idea of murder and murder by torture, to be specific. This is not a very good ending. Okay. It is, but it isn't. And hear me out. Hear me out. Okay. Am I one necessarily who promotes revenge? No. Why? Because I still believe of the God yesterday, today, and forevermore who said, "Vengeance is mine." However, sometimes God will allow you to use your enemy as your footstool. It says so in the Bible, okay? Don't come for me. So today, you may literally and figuratively see how Snow uses her enemy as her footstool by the end of this episode. That's all I'll say for now. So before getting into the story, as promised at the end of part one, I'll be talking about the names of the dwarves, okay? So again, we concluded part one with Snow White outside the dwarf's cottage. But before diving into the rest of this drama, let's talk about the original names of the dwarves. So the 1937 film by Disney included the following names, which we know to this day as Grumpy, Sneezy, Sleepy, Dopey, Bashful, Happy, and Doc. Right? If you watch Snow White, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, go ahead and watch it if you want to. But, however, there was a theatrical Broadway version that predates those seven names that came out in 1912. So the 1912 theatrical version, those names didn't quite make the cut for Disney's movie. These names, however, after reading them, I understand because not only are they confusing, in my opinion, heavily my opinion, the names are very lackluster. Okay? So here's the list of names from the original Seven Dwarves: Blick, Flick, Glick, Snick, Plick, and Quee. Weird, right? Like, those aren't even names, those aren't characters per se, personified. But in the same breath, many have suspected that Disney narrowed it down with the seven names using the chosen names representing the seven deadly sins. So, for those of you who don't know what the seven deadly sins are, they're the following: pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. So, some of you may be listening to this and you're like, okay, so which character represents which deadly sin? I'm here to tell you. I'm here to tell you, okay? So, sleepy is sloth, obvi. Grumpy is wrath, obvi. Doc is pride. Happy is lust. Bashful, bashful is gluttony. Sneezy is envy. And dopey is greed. Now, for the sake of good old fashioned fun, I, Shayna, have decided to rename the dwarves just for, again, the fun of it. Okay? So instead of stealing Disney's names, I've decided to rename the dwarves the following: drowsy, silly, flirty, lively, grouchy, sickly, and chief. Now, enough chit chat and backstory. Let's just get into the story. She knocked on the door. Hello? Is anyone here? After running through the woods since the wee hours of the morning, Snow's legs and chest had burned and ached in agony. She sat on the outside of the cottage, hoping the residents would soon come home. Teeth chattering and toes numb, all she could think about were the life events that led to this very moment. Her uncle's death, the queen's beatings and mistreatment, the palace staff scoffing at her and pretending she wasn't a true princess. All of it was a nightmare. As she began to cry again, a storm brewed, raining heavily with gushing winds. Snow tried her best to run for cover under the awning. As the water and wind whipped at her bare skin, she stood dehydrated, frightened, and quite desperate in need of shelter from the cold. Snow decided to work up the courage to open the door. Her heart began pounding when she heard the familiar howl of a wolf getting closer to the cottage. As she fiercely turned the doorknob, the door seemed to magically and slowly creak open. Snow bent over and yelled, "Hello? I'm sorry to barge in unannounced. Is anyone here?" With no response, she bent down, shoulder and head through the doorway, and shut the door quickly behind her. Riddled with anxiety, she placed the palms of her hands and back towards the door, huffing and puffing. While catching her breath, she surveyed the quaint living quarters. It appeared to be a combined living room, kitchen, and dining room. With a long stretched dining table that sat multiple people, Snow steadied her breathing as she silently counted 7 mini chairs, 7 sets of cutlery, and 7 placemats. Snow noticed, just like the doorway to the cottage and the chairs, each hedge of the doors and all furnishings were a bit short. Perhaps this was built for children, Snow thought. Though it wasn't decorated, it still felt very homelike and welcoming. It beats the dungeon she spent nearly a decade in. Snow yawned, and her eyelids became heavy. Yearning for a chance to rest after the exhausting events leading up to this moment, Snow was about to drop to the floor and rest when she noticed a small doorway near the side of the kitchen. She walked towards the door, bent down, and snooped inside. Inside the room were seven little beds made perfectly, each with fuzzy blankets, white linen sheets, and the fluffiest of pillows. Snow was reluctant at first of the idea of climbing into a stranger's bed to rest. Her fatigue, however, couldn't care less. Dirtied from blood, sweat, and mud, she plopped herself into the nearest bed and drifted to sleep. Snow had slept for hours. Waking up to the next morning's sun rays beaming on her face, she slowly opened her eyelids and sat up in bed and stretched. Remembering where she was, she felt frantic and slightly embarrassed as she heard faint whispers from outside the door. Thinking at first this house was built for children, she was frightened to hear the whispers of men. Looking around the room, she saw clearly that the other six beds had been slept in. With trepidation, Snow moved quickly out of bed to her feet as she bent down and peeked through a crack in the door. Sitting at the stretched out dining table sat seven little men with long, tangled gray beards eating breakfast. As they spoke amongst themselves, one of the men looked up and watched as Snow was eavesdropping on their conversation. Smiling, he waved and gestured for her to come and join them, saying, "Hello, child. Come eat. You must be famished." The other six men turned towards her, smiling, all but one, of course. Snow replied, "I'm so sorry that I broke into your home. I was in desperate need of shelter from the storm." Her apology was cut short, interrupted by her loud gurgling stomach. It echoed throughout the entire cottage. Snow's cheeks burned red hot with embarrassment. She hung her head low, ashamed of her circumstance. Paying her stomach no mind, one of the dwarfs fetched a spare chair and gathered a hearty meal for her alone. Another told her, "Don't worry, it's clear that you've gone through an awful lot of trouble. Where are my manners? Let me introduce myself. My name is Lively. My brothers are Sleepy, Silly, Flirty, Grouchy, Sickly, and Chief." Trying her hardest to connect each name to a face, she said each name aloud as they waved until she giggled and sat down. Once she finished eating, the dwarves collectively asked her how is it she came across their cottage in the clearing just outside the woods. The recollection of thoughts brought tears to her eyes. Telling them who she was, Snow started from the very beginning, from her uncle's death to Queen Delaney's rule to her almost murder. and her departure through the woods. Listening to her story, all seven dwarfs grew angrier and angrier with every detail. None more than Grouchy, of course. By the time she had finished, all of them were outraged. Chief replied, "Dear child, I speak for us all when I say we are truly sorry for all that has happened to you. I can't seem to understand why someone would treat a helpless child in such a manner. You may stay at this cottage for however long you require." Snow felt guilty. Looking down at her now empty plate, she couldn't think of anything to say. Not having any other option, she took a moment to collect herself. She replied, "You are all so generous, beyond measure. However, I don't want to bring you any harm." Grouchy crossed his arms and replied, "If we were worried about you bringing us harm, we would have booted you out of Lively's bed last night." Sickly responded, "We too have seen and heard and experienced how wicked this world can be. We couldn't possibly turn our backs on a child in need. After all, we were once children who all needed help. No one came to our aid." Snow flooded with emotions and fear. Trying her best to comply, still, she couldn't help but to feel liable if Queen Delaney were to ever know that Snow was still alive and that they helped her. Reluctantly, she replied, "I will accept your offer of room and board only if you will allow me to work. Though I may be a burden, I can still provide some labor as far as payment to make this worthwhile." After a brief conference held between the dwarves in a circle of shushed murmurings, they came to a consensus, with Chief as their spokesman, replying, "All right then. Every day my brothers and I leave for the coal mines before dawn and return late evenings. If you'd be willing to cook breakfast and dinner and clean, you would save us the extra labor." Elated, Snow agreed. A few moments later, she watched Lively, Sleepy, Silly, Flirty, Grouchy, Sickly, and Chief grab their coats and head out the door towards the mines. Snow, being left to her chores, felt sick to her stomach. Uncertain of her surroundings, she was a bit hypervigilant, as if the terms and conditions of her newfound safe haven was too good to be true. As the other six departed, Chief stayed behind, seeing Snow completely self conscious and vulnerable. He asked, "What's wrong?" "I guess I'm just nervous about being here by myself." Shaking his head, he responded, "Ah, I see. Just lock this door and make sure not to open it for anyone at all. Stay inside and you should be all right." Locking the door behind him, Snow waved to them from the window. They strolled jovially towards the mines in hopes to bring back gems worth large sums of money. Meanwhile, on the other side of the woods, back at her old home, Queen Delaney had felt her best in years. The previous morning, she had eaten the liver and lungs of a pig, thinking it was Snow White. Apparently, the thought of having the maiden's youthful remains being absorbed through her digestive system gave her an instant high she had never felt before. As she ate the remains, she had seen every wrinkle on her skin turned smooth, and every gray hair turned youthful in psychosomatic fashion. Waking up this morning, she felt a decade younger. Full of herself, she decided to pull up a chair in front of her vanity mirror. Watching the blue and purple smoke, her heart rate sped up. Delaney so badly ready to hear the results of what she desperately craved: adoration. In her diabolical mind, she had waited a full 24 hours to watch her plan come full circle. She savored the anticipation of her response like a child given candy. Once again, the hollowed bronze mask appeared, ready to answer yet another vain question. Delaney asked, "Enchanted mirror on the wall, who is the fairest among them all?" For a while, the mirror simply stared at her with its hollow black eyes and blank expression, replying, "You are fair, this is yet Snow White beyond the mountains, beyond the woods, and past the clearing, is still beyond measure fairer than you." Feeling like she had been uppercut in her gut, Delaney held her stomach, gasping in disbelief and fury. Bending down and catching her breath, she steadily made her way towards her bed and plopped down like a sinking rock. She screamed, "I made sure the little usurper was dealt with permanently." When Delaney played back the previous night in her mind, it then dawned on her that she had been finessed. "I knew it was too good to be true. Something about the girl tasting like pork should have raised several flags," thought Delaney. Angrily, Delaney called upon her guards, ordering them to bring the royal huntsman. For this deception, she would have his family offed and his head as punishment. Within the hour, the guards returned, telling Delaney that the huntsman and his family had left their home without a trace. Boiling hot, she took her potion bottle and threw it at the wall in frustration. Watching it shatter, the room became saturated with the smell of fresh trimmed roses. Delaney demanded the guards to leave to consult her mirror once again. This time, she did not bother to consult the bronze masked entity, but just the natural reflection. She spoke to herself in the most deranged way possible. "Look at what you've done. Once again, you trusted the wrong person to poorly execute a plan that should be done by none other than yourself. No one can do a job as good as you, so you will have to take things into your own hands." Laughing incessantly, she walked towards her wardrobe and opened a drawer. Taking out a small flask, she grinned menacingly. Flipping off the cork, Delaney guzzled its contents greedily. She ran back as quickly as possible to her mirror. As she let go the most sinister of chuckles and hollers, she watched her slim figure change. Her hips spread, her hair changed from salt and pepper to cardinal red, and face aged subtly but tastefully, like a fine wine. She twirled and twirled into the mirror, dancing with herself as she was more than pleased with her reflection. Practicing her most innocent elderly grin until she herself was convinced of her false innocence. She ran to take a horse from her stables. Mounting her most regal of horses, Delaney made her way off the palace grounds and headed into the forest. A few days had passed, and Snow's heart was full of gratitude for the dwarf's hospitality. She even had Sickly make her own bed. Sickly wasn't much of a person to share his time or his handkerchief with anyone. Somehow, though, she had been so kind and melted his heart that he began to share both with her. Afraid to offend, she took his handkerchief to blot her tears every now and then, in moments of sadness, making sure to wash her face when she was done. He was always one for sneezing and blowing his nose. Agreeing to reside with them had been the best decision she'd made in her adult life thus far. Now, as an adult, making her own decisions came with much trepidation, in fear that, like her past, the wrong choices would anger or harm those around her. Once the dwarves left for work each day, as promised, Snow dealt with all the chores, including the cooking. Though there were many mouths to feed, a hard day's work for herself and the dwarves meant there was twice as much food to prepare, especially because Flirty had the biggest of appetites. Though he was shy with the women, he was not when it came to food. Each night, the dwarves made sure to thank Snow generously. They had become a tight knit family. Each morning and night, they complimented her cooking while telling stories of their adventures in the mines. About a week from when Snow first came to the cottage, Snow, locked inside, heard a gentle knock on the door. She paused her sweeping while thinking to herself, the dwarfs had never come home this early. Resting the broom upon a chair, she scurried lightly on her toes and peered out the window. Snow saw a middle-aged woman with bright red hair. It was something about her gestures that seemed almost recognizable. Snow was certain she had never crossed paths with this woman before. Watching the woman adjust her petticoat and then look up, their eyes locked as the strange woman grinned wide-eyed. "Hello, dear child. My, aren't you an elegant young maiden? Certainly someone of your vitality and youth would be interested in capturing the attention of a suitor, I'd hope. You see, I happen to be selling some of the finest bodice lace." The middle-aged woman pulled out her corset-like bodices. Enticed by the texture and complexity, Snow retorted, "Wow, so beautiful, but I really don't need any at the moment. I don't have much money." "Oh, you don't have to buy anything. Just try it on," said the insistent woman. She thought of the promise she made with Chief, not to open the door for anyone. But this woman was clearly just lonely and was here to pass the time. What harm could she possibly do? Thought Snow. It wouldn't hurt to let her in for just a few minutes, right? When Snow opened the door, the woman pulled her in to a tight embrace. So tight, in fact, Snow coughed upon release. Laughing aloud, the woman said, "You remind me so much of my own daughter." Come, child, let me help you lace up the bodice properly. Feeling vulnerable for a moment due to her lack of mothering, Snow was smitten by the idea of a seemingly nurturing mother be so doting to her. Snow turned around as instructed, walking into the kitchen area, allowing the woman to secure the bodice tightly. Enjoying the oxytocin gathered from having such a heartfelt, intimate moment, Snow snapped out of her daze as she gasped. Um, Miss, I think the bodice is too tight. I can buy more lace if needed. She laughed while contesting. Nonsense. The tighter the better when it comes to bodices, my dear. With a tiny waist such as yours, it would be a shame not to show it off. Guilt tripped into showing great reverence for such a quote unquote kind gesture. Snow's silence was taken as compliance. Snow awkwardly smiled, focusing on taking shorter yet quicker breaths as her face once again turned pink. With several more twists and heaves, and one final grand tug at the lace, Snow's feet began to lift from the ground. With the intention of elongating her torso, she fell forward in exhaustion, holding the edge of the table. For a moment, Snow hung from the woman's fingertips like a marionette doll. As the woman let go, unable to make a clear pathway for her lungs to expand, Snow began to choke relentlessly. She tried her best to pull the bodice off. Not only was it tied too tightly, but the ends were so tight that Snow knew she'd need the assistance of two people to get it off. As the old woman crept away cackling, attempting one last time to warn the woman, Snow dropped to her knees and then on her side in a fetal position on the floor, almost unconscious. From the angle of the floor, she watched as the peddler woman packed up the rest of her bodices on the long table, ducking her head, and fled out the door. Snow, choking on the ground, stretched out her arm and hand, attempting to call out for help. Abandoned and now blue in the face, Snow lay motionless, taking the smallest of breaths possible. She had already gone through so much. Now it all seems as if it were to end right here. Another foolish decision, she thought. As she closed her eyes to reserve what little energy she had left, minutes later she felt the binding around her waist snap as she gasped and looked into the eyes of her rescuer. It was as if angels prompted Chief and his brothers to come home earlier that day. With the most violent of coughing fits, she looked at Chief in the face. He looked down at her, in confusion and great concern along with the others. Snow, attempting to form a sentence in between the coughs, was hushed. Chief had ordered the others to fetch Snow some water from the nearby well. The well, despite the generous rainfall days prior, had nearly run dry. Silly and Drowsy sprung into action and drew in a bucket of water, to which Silly clumsily dropped. Silly, however, sneakily stole a second pail of water from the well in hopes he could use it for himself. Nonetheless, Drowsy, more alert than ever before in his life, managed to salvage a considerable amount for a full cup. After sitting up and weeping while sipping on the water, Snow gave every last detail of her encounter with the red-haired stranger. Infuriated, Chief patted Snow on the back, saying, "The evil queen managed to disguise herself and trick you. Many whispers have come from the palace walls about her use of sorcery. You mustn't fall for it again, for it may have cost you your life if we hadn't shown up in time to cut you out of the bodice." Grouchy butted in. "Though we may be busy during the day, you must abide by the rule and not answer the door to anyone. If I had the chance to pummel that wretched queen, I'd—" "That's enough! You would be foolish enough to get us all detained. We'd never be able to dig up real gold in the mines, then would we?" said Lively. Lively's big belly pushed Grouchy in his chair as he crossed his arms. Sickly, who had cried while watching everything in the corner, was now relieved. They had forgotten he was there, being that he was so quiet, until he sneezed so hard that he flew backwards from behind Chief's chair at the head of the table all the way to the front door. They all laughed so hard, including Snow White. Resuming their nightly dinner, they all washed up, telling Snow all about their day, and prepared for bed after saying their prayers. Before leaving for the morning, Chief, being the last to leave, had made sure to lock the windows and doors. Snow, hugging them each out the doorway, felt much better after a good night's sleep. Washing the dishes and hand washing the laundry, Snow thought about the previous day. That poor peddler woman was probably just old and hard of hearing. She couldn't possibly mean any harm. It must be difficult having to go from door to door. I too would be in her shoes if not at the mercy of these little men. Surely this couldn't be the work of Queen Delaney. Giving herself a lunchtime break as she sat down, Snow heard another knock at the door. She slowly stood up. She hesitated, but looked to see who it was. This time it was a young girl with silver blonde hair. Snow had called out, "I'm sorry, but I mustn't answer the door to any strangers. Please, whatever it is, I'm not interested." The young woman replied, "No problem. I can show you what I'm selling right from the window." Taking out the item from her satchel, out came a golden ruby rose jeweled embedded comb. Quite similar to her mother's brush, Snow froze and teared up. Entranced by the comb, the young woman then pushed the comb back in her satchel. "So sorry to have upset you. If you're not interested, that's all right. I'll be on my way then." The young woman turned her back, pretending to walk off quickly, and smirked. Snow yelled at her, "Wait! Stop! Please!" Just like that, Snow rushed to open the front door. "I wish to buy that comb." Offering to show Snow how well the comb worked, she offered to step inside and demonstrate on how to use it most effectively. Sniffling away the last of her tears, Snow allowed the young woman entrance. Snow sat on the floor with her legs crossed like a pretzel, allowing the young mysterious woman to comb through her hair as she sat on one of the little chairs. As the comb went through her scalp, Snow felt at peace. Her eyes closed. She hadn't felt this much comfort since her late uncle was still alive. The comb felt sensational, gliding down her hair from her temple to her nape and further down her back. She almost fell asleep until a sharp pain pulsated at the back of her head. Feeling lightheaded, Snow slumped forward, face hitting the floor. Yet again, Snow's world went black, and here again she looked at the faces of the seven dwarfs. Shaking his head in disbelief and frustration, Chief helped Snow sit up once more. Young Snow, you will make all the hairs on my head turn white. Rubbing her eyes in confusion, she asked, what had happened? Drowsy, Lively, Chief, Grouchy, Sickly, and Flirty had all taken turns. They collectively told her what they witnessed upon their arrival. Assuming she was on the floor dead, when they saw her chest still rise and fall, Chief slowly attempted to pick her body up off the floor with the help of the others. However, Lively found the tines of golden comb lodged in her scalp. Silly had removed it after tripping on his own 2 feet and knocking the rest of the comb out of Snow's scalp, attempting to break his fall. Silly nodded fervently as he stuffed his mouth with water he saved from the previous day, and spitting it out, clapping his hands and laughing to himself. When she gathered enough strength to stand on her own, she felt the back of her head touching the puncture wounds. Though small, it was enough to kill her with poison. Snow was in disbelief that she had been tricked twice within 2 days. Why would she do that? She seemed so innocent. She didn't even want to come in initially. It wasn't until I had all intentions to buy that beautiful comb that she even combed my hair so calmly I almost fell asleep. Grouchy protested. You should have let her go about her merry way. Lively elbowed him. I too have fallen victim to the allure of finer things. Don't beat yourself up too badly, said Lively. Drowsy agreed. I too may have fallen for her trick if someone were to comb my hair. After all, I do love to relax. We know, Drowsy, yelled the others in unison. Sickly and Flirty, whispering to each other, ready for dinner, averted the conversation by asking about what was on the menu. The rest of them took off their hats and smacked them for their lack of empathy in that moment. As they all washed up and said grace and ate, Chief pulled Snow to the side. Though he was disappointed, he was only telling her the truth in love. One by one, they each hugged Snow after their meal and headed to bed. This is why I told you to never open the door for anyone. Sleep well, princess. Adhering to her daily routine, she woke up early to give each of them their breakfast. Feeling bright-eyed and bushy-tailed once more, Snow made sure to give an extra serving to Grumpy to smooth him over. Of course, Flirty witnessed the gesture. As he fixed his lips to ask for more, Chief kicked his knee underneath the table. Making their way towards the mines, Snow kissed them each on the forehead and made sure the door was locked. Snow's happy mood came to a screeching halt while kneading dough when she heard a knock at the door. This time, Snow didn't budge nor look out any of the windows. Instead, she replied, I'm unable to come to the door. Please sell your merchandise elsewhere. After hearing deafening silence for the next few minutes, she resumed the kneading of her dough, when suddenly she heard a commotion outside by the nearby garden that the dwarves. In the distance, she heard a cry for help. Ah, help! Anyone, please! An old woman with a crooked back, hooded cloak, and long pointed nose lie in a dirt pile amongst the vegetation. Snow looked out the kitchen window. Please, if anyone is home, come help me. I've fallen and I can't seem to find my cane. Snow grit her teeth in anxiety. She thought to herself, this could be another trick, but then again, if it wasn't and she left the poor woman all by her lonesome, she'd be outside in the dirt for several hours before the dwarfs came home. Feeling like she was straight out of options, against her better judgment, she opened the front door and made her way towards the vegetable garden. Helping the woman up, after assisting her find her cane, she prompted the woman to be on her way. When the old woman claimed her ankle was swollen and asked to rest for a while to recover. Not seeing the old, emaciated, and disheveled woman as much of a threat, Snow decided to help her inside. She fixed the woman a plate of food after rearranging the chairs to help elevate her foot. The old woman replied, You're so attentive and caring for offering me something to eat. Let me also offer you something delicious in return for such great hospitality. Reaching into the pocket of her cloak, she quickly held out the biggest, shiniest red apple Snow had ever seen. Snow covered her mouth politely. Oh, I just couldn't accept anything from a stranger. After all, such a perfect apple shouldn't be shared. Pulling a knife from her cloak, she uttered, Such a sweet, caring young girl. Tell you what, I'll cut it in half and we can share it. Thinking to herself that if the apple were indeed dangerous, the old woman wouldn't dare share it with her. Snow agreed, watching her slice the fruit in half and passing it to her. She watched some of its juices seep out onto the table. It smelled divine. The memories of the fresh apple scent immediately brought her back to the kitchen of the palace, when the scullery maids baked apple pies in her childhood. Accepting her half, Snow watched the old woman bite into hers. Being careful not to look too suspicious and making little to no eye contact, she waited for Snow to take a bite, then smiled a crooked smile, so bright it nearly scared Snow. Snow tried her best to swallow the fruit. Shortly after, she felt her throat close until she passed out once more. Satisfied with her evil deed, Delaney cackled and laughed, standing over Snow's body. Holding her stomach, she laughed and laughed, waddling out of the threshold and shutting the door behind her. She picked up speed, walking and then running far enough through the forest. She drank the balance of her potion. Changing back into her true form, Delaney mounted her steed, heading back to the castle. Just as she took flight on her horse in triumph, Chief, lively, drowsy, flirty, sickly, silly, and grouchy, had returned home, mourning the loss of their dear friend. Chief felt the most responsible. Trying everything they could to revive her, nothing had worked. To their knowledge, nothing in the cottage was out of place or traceable to figure out what had happened. There was no poisoned comb, no tight bodice, not a single thing appeared to be wrong. She was just a young girl taken away before her appointed time. In fact, even in death, she looked as if she was asleep. Lips still rose red and face still porcelain and doll like. They tried their best to preserve her body. For 3 full days, they mourned, placing her body on a bed of briars. The initial plan was to bury her after their mourning period. But after the 3 days, oddly enough, her body refused to decay. As they all came in agreement to not bury her as to not hide her beauty in the ground, they crafted a crystal quartz glass coffin from the jewels each of them found within the coal mines. On the side of the grave was carved out, "Here lies the Princess Snow White," in golden cursive font. Placing the grave high on a nearby mountain top, outside the forest and closer to the palace, they each took turns guarding it with their lives day and night. Years had passed, and still Snow's body showed no signs of decomposition. Strolling by in the nearby woods one bright morning, a prince from a faraway kingdom had traveled with a caravan of nobility when suddenly a beam of refracted light had hit so strongly it stopped them from traveling further. Curious by such a radiant beam, the prince sought after the source. He looked up, noticing that the light beam came from the mountaintop. Abandoning the caravan and his loyal subjects, he began climbing the mountaintop that revealed the crystal quartz grave. Taken aback to his amazement was the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes upon. He marveled at every detail of her unblemished skin, blood red lips, and dark ebony hair. As Lively left his post down the mountainside, trading places with Grouchy, Grouchy made his way up, waving his fist at the prince. "What are you doing here? Leave this instant. This is our princess." Lively ran back up the mountain, his pot belly slowing him down, but he made it just in time to catch his breath and stopped Grouchy from doing something he'd later regret. This is the one time Lively thanked the Lord for gifting them little legs. Lively gave the bird call signal as the rest of the dwarves came running up from the mines up to the mountaintop. Chief came out from the crowd. He introduced each dwarf, then himself, as the main caretaker of the coffin. Grouchy rolled his eyes. The prince introduced himself. I am Prince Luke, and I am here to take this maiden to my kingdom, for I cannot let such beauty sit here idly. Tell me, men, what would be the cost to have her come with me? They fought back collectively, arguing that she was far more valuable than any price he could ever pay. Apologizing for the snub remark, he said, You're right. She is not a tangible item of purchase, but I beg with all humility, as he bent down on one knee, that I would treat her with the utmost respect and dignity. You see, she would no longer need your protection, being that she would be besides royal guards, safe from the world, if she came with me. Skeptical yet moved by his bravado and sincerity, they consented if and only if they would be able to be allowed a visit from time to time. Prince Luke agreed. Summoning his guards from the royal caravan, he ordered them to make room for the crystal quartz grave of his new-found beloved. As the dwarfs helped to load the grave onto the back of the caravan, they each kissed the grave, telling the prince they would help bring the body back to the castle. Moving rather hastily back to Prince Luke's kingdom, the dwarves soon realized that they should have taken better precautions to secure the body. As the caravan traveled across the cobblestone drawbridge, Princess Snow's body flew out the back and hit the ground. Mortified, the dwarfs jumped out the back of the caravan as it stopped at a standstill. The now shattered coffin left the dwarves in tears. Running back to his princess, Prince Luke ran out of the caravan, ignoring the shards of glass, holding up her head to his chest in attempts to move any glass that may cut her perfect body. As her head lay sideways in his chest, they began to hear coughing noises. Just like that, Snow sprung back to life after coughing up the last of the clogged fruit lodged in her throat. It seems that the fall had loosened up the last bit of apple that they could not find all those years ago. She woke up, looking at Prince Luke, saying, You're not chief. Where am I? The seven dwarfs laughed and shouted in exuberance. Prince Luke held Snow in his arms as he called for a horse to assist him and her to the castle. When Snow was able to regain her strength a few hours later, Prince Luke welcomed the dwarves and Snow to have a feast in her honor. Reciting every last detail of her terrible life story, Prince Luke wiped away each of Snow's tears. He held her hands and listened intently. He too became exasperated by the evil queen's schemes. At that very moment, he thought of no better time to avenge her by asking for her hand in marriage. Happily, Princess Snow blushed. Her heart fluttered and she agreed to the engagement. Both the royal courts and the dwarves cheered happily. In almost no time at all, word had spread to every neighboring kingdom. it was rumored that a beautiful raven haired, red lipped princess was set to marry Prince Luke. Queen Delaney, too, had received the invitation whilst hearing the whispers. Heading to her chambers, shutting the door quickly behind her, she brushed her hair with the notorious jeweled brush in her now gray, lifeless hair. Years ago, when she completed her apple sorcery, the masked mirror entity had already confirmed she was the fairest at the time. But as she lived in a state of false reality and bliss, her exhilaration was but a dying flame once she heard the news. To make sure of her number one spot, she consulted the mirror yet again with the same infamous question. But, just like that, she received her unfavorable answer. Queen Delaney made it her business to be front and center at this wedding. She refused to let some new princess take her spot as fairest. After going through all the trouble of ridding Snow, Delaney screamed at her mirror, "Why can't you ever let me be happy?" She threw the brush at the mirror and watched it crack, looking at her own reflection. Meanwhile, Prince Luke devised a plot alongside his fiancée to destroy the evil queen once and for all. A few days later, Queen Delaney prepared for her entrance to the wedding. She wore her finest gown and perfume, ready to gaze upon the face of new competition. When she made her way to the neighboring kingdom, Queen Delaney's carriage upon arrival was hunted down by order of Prince Luke. Delaney was instantly dragged by her flailing arms and thrown into the palace's dungeon. She impugned, "What is the meaning of such barbaric behavior towards such a regal guest?" The guards nonchalantly remained quiet and locked her away as instructed. Angered, she called the attention of the guards, making herself a spectacle and punching the bars and walls until she bloodied her knuckles. She thought of nothing but revenge that she'd have when she broke out of here. Hours had passed. Dragging her once again by her flailing arms, Delaney endured her own walk of shame through the corridors and palace staff as they headed towards the grand ballroom. She swore at the guards and all who stood by and watched. When she made it to the open doors of the grand ballroom, she was too stunned to speak. Finding it difficult to pick her jaw up off the floor, she was brought before the now King Luke and his beautiful new queen in front of a beautifully torched fireplace. Sitting in her sparkly white gown and crown, Delaney became green with envy, gazing upon Queen Snow White. Recognizing Snow as she approached closer, Delaney's anxiety was so bad she could no longer walk. So, they continued dragging her body another 50 feet before the new king and queen, invested in the drama that unfolded before their eyes. When she refused to stand before King Luke, they flung her body towards his feet. Unsure of what was happening, Delaney begged, What is happening, your majesty, and why am I here in such a manner? King Luke explained, You have been summoned to further help me with my gorgeous wife's wedding gift. Delaney scoffed and uttered, Her? Of all people to marry, what's so special about her? Ignoring her envy, he stated, It is time you are properly punished for the conditions of my wife's childhood. Motioning to the guards, out came a long, large pair of silver metal tongs. The guards, helping each other, they carefully reached behind the newly wedded couple into the fireplace. Out came a pair of red, glowing iron shoes. For the first time ever, Queen Delaney turned pale. She tried her best to hop on her feet and run for the nearest exit. But the guards who stood post grabbed her yet again. This time, however, they held her by her arms and rose her body above their heads. When given the signal by the king, they removed her shoes from which she came with. King Luke read her crimes against both kingdoms. You, Queen Delaney, have been found guilty indefinitely of the following: murdering the late king, slandering the name of the king, and your majesty, Queen Snow, and the 4 attempts to end the queen's life. Fighting with the last bit of energy she had, 2 additional armed guards slowly set the blazing hot shoes beneath her. She kicked and pleaded for mercy, but as the room full of faces contorted and disapproved of her, Delaney came to terms that neither the nobility nor the queen would come to her rescue. Attempting one last pitch to be merciful on her, King Luke shook his head and with the wave of his hand, 2 guards took Delaney's legs, stretched them out, and lowered her feet into the burning hot shoes. As the second pair of guards stepped away, letting her kick frantically, the first pair of guards remained stoic, letting her feet dangle and kick in the shoes mid-air. The crowd cheered with approval for the evil queen's just rewards. She wailed in pain. In a matter of minutes, her scalded feet made her body emit otherworldly screams, as if she were in the pits of hell. The smell of her burning feet became unbearable throughout the entire ballroom. Trying to kick the shoes from her feet, she failed, being that they were a perfect fit. When given another signal, the guards released her arms. She danced in circles, screaming for help. The band then adjusted the tempo of their music to accommodate Queen Delaney's tempo. As she spun in circles, the crowd mocked and pointed. At that moment, Delaney didn't know which was worse, the pain in her feet or the pain to her inflated, grandiose ego. When the physical pain became greater than the emotional and mental, her body fell to the floor, unconscious. As the guests left with nothing much left to see, the king had offered the bride his hand as they walked together towards her body. Giving her his sword, Snow stretched out Delaney's hand, took the sword and slit her throat. Standing victoriously over her tormentor's body, she looked at her husband, deciding to go on a rather extensive honeymoon. Snow placed her foot on Delaney's neck and ran off with her husband to their awaited carriage. Living happily in both her rightful kingdom and the kingdom through marriage, they became a united front. Snow made sure to place all of those who had done her wrong in the dungeons to rot. She lived a long life of happiness, outnumbering her bad days with good. King Luke and Queen Snow bore a child named Princess Ivy. Queen Snow made sure to instill in Ivy the concepts of misguided generosity and evil people. Brushing Ivy's hair each night, she taught her how to use her brain and her heart, and that those who live by the sword shall also die by the sword. They all lived a long, happy life together. And yes, even in her old age, Snow remained beautiful inside and out, and was quite happy with her own reflection. She stared back at the mirror, and though she lived through punishment first, she understood in her old age that those pure of heart will eventually live to see their rewards. And that, my friends, concludes this fairy tale origin. For those of you that are in the live chat, I'm right along with you. What a story. What an ending. Yes, the ending felt super gratifying. And to those of you who will be in the comments, let me know what you think. If there's anything I can take away from this story, I can honestly say that what you see in the mirror, your personal self reflection, will be the determining factor of how you carry yourself within the world. In fact, I'm not quite sure if I'll be following up with a video with a breakdown, but I will say this. I recently came across a Japanese proverb where they spoke about how the Japanese believe that there's three faces that each person has. There's the face, or I should say the mask, that they show the world, the mask that they show their family, and the mask that they have in their personal life, right? And it's not to say with that concept that you're hiding any bits of yourself, but the two masks between your family and the world really are a reflection of how you feel about the mask that you give to yourself personally. And I want to say this. I don't know who's listening, and I'm purposely not putting myself on the screen for good reason. But I want you to think about the mirror in part one, right? And what was written on that mirror for reward or for punishment, and self esteem and self love. I want you to think about the two prior series I had on this channel for self reflection, the mirror, and self love. And I want you to think about how that correlates with the concept of the inner child. Snow White is a prime example of how a person with a pure soul could have easily been tainted by the world around her, being that she never got to experience the love of a mother or the full love of a father, right? But somehow, through proper decision making and her living her life with authenticity and love, which is again the highest frequencies you can operate off of, who she was also who she attracted. But in the same breath, who she was also angered those who weren't like her. Her stepmother or her aunt really had no reason not to like her. But in life, like most people who are unapologetically themselves, Snow didn't ask to be the most fairest of them all, or the most beautiful, or the most kind, or the most sweet. She was genuinely herself, unfiltered, living in her truth, in raw and pure form. Sometimes it's not necessarily who you are that upsets people, it's what you as a person represents spiritually that upsets people who are not on your wavelength. It wasn't in the queen to be an authentic person, to be a loving person. Why? It already showed in the ways that she became a queen. She didn't become a queen through bloodline. She became a queen through marriage, but not even wholesome marriage, through vanity, through desperation. She was a widowed woman who was down on her luck, and I'm pretty sure she became engulfed in the king for the sake of her being in the times that she was in, that if you were a single woman with no family, especially a father or brother to help you, such as Snow White, you were destitute. So we start to see quite a few levels of the story, how it plays out, and how, as women, again, or men in society, if you don't have certain things and you feel that if you don't put on a persona and aka fake it till you make it, that you become a victim of circumstance. But this story is a prime example of how, when you don't neglect the inner child, no matter what age you are, and you keep tending to that inner child, and you surround yourself with people who are able to bring out the best in you and help raise the inner child with you as you help raise their inner child, only the best things can grow from that. You as a person can grow and learn from your mistakes, or right your wrongs, or even receive justice for the things that people did to you that weren't right. Not saying that you should take advantage of getting back or getting even with people, but if the opportunity presents itself and you get the okay from the Most High, He will literally make your enemy your footstool. What did Snow do at the end? She literally stepped on Queen Delaney right before she ran away into the sunset with her husband into their carriage to go off on their rather extensive honeymoon, the same one Queen Delaney was supposed to have with her husband, the king. So think about all these things as we go into the inner child, and I will be back hopefully next week if all goes well. I may or may not have to attend a funeral, so I may not have time to gather up, I should say, content within a timely manner. Crossing my fingers that I'll be able to have time and work doesn't get too crazy this week. I'll be back Sunday. If not, I will let you guys know via announcements. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for staying this long with me. I know this second half was a bit lengthy, but as you can see, it was worth it and we needed to talk about it. Okay? I thank you for your time. I thank you for your patience. I thank you for sticking it out with me every week. And ultimately, God thanks you for putting time aside to talk with not just myself, but with Him. Thank you very much. Thank you for your donations. Thank you for hitting the like button. And ultimately, thank you for engaging in the content with your comments, with your thoughts, with your prayers, reaching out to me on the gram. You guys are so kind, like, honestly. Okay, I'm just gonna get off before I cry. I will see you guys later. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Shout out to Tiger Topaz's grandma. I love you. I am forever your Star Trek girl. I love you. You're beautiful. You're amazing. I love all my track stars. You have, again, an amazing rest of your day. And I will talk and type with you later.